In this video, we are going to be talking about the tiled and the triplanar nodes. These are nodes that allows you to bring images onto the model in different ways. The tiled one is going to simply tile something across, and the triplanar is going to project the image from a few different angles, allowing you to blend it nicely. Before we use those, we have to bring in images, and I'm going to bring in a few images from the Fliplanars skin kit. We can simply drag these images from the Explorer into the image manager. If you don't have the image manager open, you can simply get that from the right-hand side, image manager, and you can just dock this somewhere else. In this case, we're just going to be docking it over here. Now that we have the images, let's talk about the tiled node. There are a few different ways we can access the tile node. The first one is we can right-click, go to Nodes, Procedural, Pattern, and then Tiled. This is quite a ride, so this is how I don't normally do it, and then Tiled. Here we go. Next one is simply hit the Tab key and type Tiled. Then there we go. And the third one is a way nobody really seems to know, which is a secret way. This is something I found only by really going deep into the documentation. And the way you do this is simply by finding the image you want, control dragging into the node graph like this. And there we go. Now we have this one. The advantage of the control dragging is that this sets up the image at the same time, while the other ones don't have an image at this point. The way we can add an image though is very simple. You just drag it from the image manager over here. So this one doesn't have it, we can just delete this one. So now we have these two, and these two are now identical. If we were to tile this across the image now, or rather preview the node on top of the model, we can just delete one of these ones. Then you can see that this is indeed tiled. And you can see here there is a massive seam. From a purely practical point of view, this often isn't really an issue, simply because oftentimes you've painted tons of stuff, projected tons of stuff, have other adjustment layers on top, so you can't really see the seams. Also because most of the time this kind of image map is going to be tiled a lot of different times. So we can have a look at how to repeat this more. If we go down a little bit, we can set this here to 10, hit the Tab key twice. Now we can repeat this. Already now you can see that the seam becomes less prominent, like you have to actually look a little bit for it. Now, not saying it's not an issue, but I'm just saying that it can be less of an issue than you might assume. So now we can just see this being tiled across the entire model. Really, really useful stuff. We can also go over here to the top and we can just change the rotation amount, which is incredibly handy as well. If you want to change the color space of the image, for instance, in this case, this is set to sRGB, we can go over to the image manager, select the image, and just set this to raw data, scalar data. Now you can see this is now a scalar image. In the case that that's what you want to do, for instance, if you want to use this with a bump map, you can very easily go down here, just plug this into the bump map, and we can preview this now. And now you can see what this looks like here. So now you can see that this does indeed work as a bump map. This is what I mean by, from a pure practical point of view, oftentimes you can get away with this, like not the seams being an issue, because when you tile this across, oftentimes you really can't see this. But sometimes it is an issue. Sometimes it's a real issue that you have seams like that, and I'm not saying you should be sloppy. So the way you can deal with that sometimes is to use a triplanar. A triplanar is a different method of getting your image on top of the model. And you can access the triplanar in the same three ways as we access the tile. First one is right-click, Nodes, and this one lives on a projection instead. So this lives right here, triplanar projection. The second way is to type just triplanar, there we go. And the third way is to go over here, but instead of control clicking and dragging, we are shift dragging. So now you can see triplanar projection right here. So nice and easy. And like with the other one, by shift dragging, we get this image set up as well. If you don't have this image set up, you can also just drag this over like so. But the difference between this and the tile is that this needs to be added in 3 places, hence the name triplanar. So the triplanar simply means that there are 3 planes that's going to be projecting. So one of these already set this up, the other ones you have to set up yourself. So that's really handy, that fact that you can use the shift drag. Now with this, you can see that there aren't really any seams, so to speak of, which is great. And this works very well if you have a bit of a dodgy UV map, but you also want to be a bit careful with this as well, because this simply blends it. So in some areas here, you are going to get issues with like a blended seam and such. Also in this case, you can see it a little bit if you zoom out. It's a bit hard to see with this exact pattern, but there are some transparency issues. For instance, you can see here, it's very sharp right here, but in some of these areas, it becomes very soft, and there are actual like alpha issues with this. So what you can do, you can go under the triplanar and you can change the fall off for this. So you can like change the fall off end, and you can start to see that this now changes. You can change the start and the end. This is basically determining how sharp the transition between different planes are, because it actually has different planes. So you can see here now we get a lot of stretching. So sometimes you have to go in here to really make sure that this here works. I wouldn't personally use a triplanar for something like this, I think, because this here is not going to wrap correctly around the model. Because now you can see here, this is just a plane that goes like so, and it wraps over this, and then we have a side plane that goes this way, goes here. So in this case, I strongly believe that a tiled would work a lot better, but it's still really useful to have this. It's really cool, all the control you have here as well, because you can control each individual plane as well. So you can repeat one more than others, you can offset things, you can have an angle to it. So you have a lot of control with this that you don't often necessarily have in other software. So the triplanar here is fantastic, and it's very good for hard surface assets where you need to get quick variety in your model, and particularly if you don't have amazing UVs as well. Sometimes these can also get heavy, so then what you can do, you can make a bake point, and you can just make a bake point here, and you can just put this in and then just bake it. I'm not going to bake it now, but that's something you could do in case you want to bake down something like a triplanar, because oftentimes you figure out the look quite early, and there's no reason for this kind of stuff to be live, because then you have 3 images that are live, or a tileable that is just live, and often there isn't really a point, so then you can cache this down like so. Back to the tiled, and a cool tip with the tiled is that sometimes when you're tiling something across, let me choose a lesser degree of this set. Let's set this to something like 7 or so. Cool technique with this to get more variety in this, because this can sometimes look quite tiled, is you can offset them and merge them together. So what we can do, we can Control-C, Control-V to tile this across. Then we can make a merge node, hit the M key. We can make one go above the other. You just remove this from this. We don't need this to go across. And now this is going to be exactly the same. There's not going to be any variety in this whatsoever, because they are exactly the same. And what we can do, we can make one, the one goes over, we can make this one rotate a different amount. So now you can see here, if we were to go in here, this rotates now in a different manner. So that's really, really useful, because this means that you can now get variety in this. Then what we can do, we can use something like a cloud to create a mask. So now if we do this, you're going to start to see that you get a lot more variety in this, because now we have a few different ones that have been, 2 different ones that have been blended together. So we have one here, we have one here, and now it blends together. In this case, this might be too crazy because the variety here might not work at all, but it's a really useful way of creating some more interesting things. In this case, you can see that the cloud here isn't a particularly sophisticated mask in any way, but what you can do, you can go in here, you can change the scale of this, you can also change the roughness of it if you want this to be sharper or not. You can go in here and you can add a contrast as well. So we can go in and we can add a contrast to this to make this even more contrasty. So if you want this here, for instance, to be even more contrast like so, change your contrast pivot a little bit. So we can just make this really contrasty, and now you can start to see that in these exact areas, you can start to just blend this a little bit more. Of course, be careful with this, don't go too crazy, but you can blend this in, and now you can get a lot of variety in just using 2 tileables. So before, and then after. Just introduce a lot of variety to this one. In case the rotation is too much as well, this is match the rotation here, so there's no rotation at all. Now these should look the same. What we can do now, we can offset them differently, so we can like just move one to the side, and this is also going to break up a lot of the tileable look as well for it, just so that this doesn't look so tiled. So this is something I do all the time. Very, very, very useful. Another little tip as well when it comes to this is if you want to add a lot more variety to this as well. Now we're a little bit into advanced tips here, but you can add another one. We can maybe even add a rhino skid on top of this, just hold on the control key, and we can make a merged one. So this is going to be on the base. This is going to be on the top, like so. And now you can see, of course, the rhino skin is way too crazy. And now we can tile this by something like 10. We want to make this smaller. And just to see what this looks like. Okay, even way more than, so we can go on our tile and set this to 20. Maybe even more. We want to set this to 40. And there we go. So now you can start to see that this is going to break this up quite a lot. So then we can go here, here, and then we can start to just making sure These are set to the same color space so that they will blend correctly. There we go. And now we can go over here and we can set this to something like overlay, soft light. And now you kind of get a little bit of breakup in this as well. You can change the opacity for this one. So we go here, we can now change opacity, and now you can just see this is going to break this up quite nicely. So we can go in and put this whole thing now, for instance, under a bump. And now we should start to see that this can look quite interesting. What we can do now in this case is the bump is too weak. So we can go under the material, the shader, go all the way to the bottom. We can set this to 1 instead, just to make this a bit more intense. And now you can start to see how much variety we get in this. In this case, this is actually set to the wrong color space because I decided to use this for a bump, and they just have to be set to scalar data and raw data for this. So now you can see that we can create a lot of variety within this, and we're just using 2 tilables here. The only thing we're doing is 2 tilables. Then from the previous lecture, where we talked about how to organize this, we can now make the whole thing here under a backdrop, and there we go. So now we can control this quite nicely. So this is really handy. If you want to adjust this even more now, you can go in and you can start to like rotate this. It's going to rotate the rhino skin, or you can change this to be even more intense or even smaller. So now I can change the scale, or you can go into one of the other ones as well, and you can start to like rotate this around. So this is all live, and this is a fantastic way to add variety to your skin. So this is what I'm talking about with the whole. Oftentimes you can get away with this without, like just with tilables, without worrying about the seams, because in this case the seams are here, but from looking at this you can't really see it. You can see it if you kind of know about it. Like here, yes, you can see it, but if you're zooming out, honestly, a large amount of times, often you really can't see it. So tilables, incredibly useful. Triplanars also incredibly useful, but I definitely use tilables more than I use triplanars. So yeah, that's it for the tilable and triplanar lesson.